of whom were oh, all of whom were Indigenous educators from the different territories that you can see on the screen there. All of the educators that we did interview, we had already established kinship relationships with. So we had known them, worked with them, or were maybe had gone to school with them, things like that. And so coming from a research perspective, that's not necessarily usually something that happens. Usually you're trying to remain impartial so that you don't know the participants, but that was not how we saw a vision for this project. So it was those Indigenous educators who we knew in our lives back home who changed who we are and how we teach, and they inspired us to do more. And so they were really at the heart of our project. So our goal was to understand the lived experiences of these educators across the four distinct geographies. We sought to identify themes, patterns, interconnections that could inform and transform current Western pedagogy and practice. We focused on the broader interface of education, listening for shared experiences that revealed both its current challenges and emerging possibilities.
Yeah, we framed our research around two guiding questions. First, how do Indigenous educators experience and navigate their identity within Western educational structures? And next, what are the connections, patterns, or themes amongst Indigenous educator experiences within the K through 12 public schooling system throughout Turtle Island?
Yeah, and so we ultimately chose the conversational method, which is a method developed by Neheo and Soto scholar Dr. Margaret Kovach for our data gathering. So Dr. Kovach emphasizes that, quote, the conversational method is of significance to Indigenous methodologies because it is a method of gathering knowledge that is rooted in oral storytelling, traditions that align with an Indigenous paradigm, end quote. The conversational method aligns with the Indigenous epistemologies that position oral stories as a primary source of knowledge. It emphasizes dialogue, fostering relational accountability and reciprocity rather than extraction. Listening is central to this approach, enabling researchers to make relationship with both the participants and their stories.
Yeah, and we should add that both yarning and talk story approaches influenced this idea that she developed. And yeah, it's kind of cool that it does, that this method in particular does connect to Hawaii. Throughout our conversations, a powerful metaphor emerged, ultimately one that guided our entire research. We began to view the Indigenous educators that we were working with as symbols of strength and resurgence, akin to the buffalo. Inspired by the deep reciprocal relationships many Indigenous communities have with the buffalo, we followed their lead in both symbolism as well as practice. Like the buffalo, we aim to approach our work with purpose and respect, honoring the stories shared with us while also prioritizing sustainability and our responsibility to the future and the land itself. As our work progressed toward analysis, we were cautious to avoid fragmenting the stories. At every stage of our analysis, we intentionally aimed to preserve the wholeness of the stories, ensuring that the context, emotion, spiritual teachings, and place remained intact. Guided by the buffalo, here was our methodology.
So we'll see if these little buffalo work on the next.
Here
They
we
will give
go.
us trouble, but that's okay. We'll try it out. So our first phase of our methodology was the Buffalo Speaks. So this was our story gathering phase. Every educator offered their voice and experiences as a gift, and we listened with care and responsibility. Shifting to analysis, we followed the herd using an adapted version of the collaborative story analysis method. After listening, our research group met in a circle, and then we just asked each other what resonated with you. The openness of this question allowed for connections to emerge, feelings to be identified, and spiritual insights to be shared. So rather than analyzing in a detached and decontextualized manner, we intentionally cultivated an approach that allowed the stories to be experienced as whole embodied narratives. The next stage reflects the weight that each buffalo carries on its journey. Each buffalo in the herd carries hope, resilience, pain, a sense of belonging, and much more. In an attempt to explore a second way of making meaning, we drew on Kovach's interpretation of Saldana's coding work and initiated a small-scale, affective, a priori coding process. In observing the path of the buffalo, coding became a relational act of witnessing. Each story left its unique tracks, which we mapped through reflection, thematic memos, and collaborative discussions. These tracks provided a visual and narrative representation of values, emotions, and beliefs. The act of mapping was an ethical process. It was simply a way to trace where the buffalo had already walked. Rather than coding to reduce or categorize, our approach used affective and relational coding as a form of witnessing, allowing meaning to emerge organically without severing this story from context.
Okay.
It
The,
worked.
the tracks are there. Once individual stories were coded, the herd came back together in a, oh no, yep, came back together in a circle, bringing the narratives together, mirrored the gathering of the buffalo for strength and protection. Rather than organizing the stories into fixed categories, we returned to them collectively, listening for connections, resonances, and patterns that revealed themselves over time. Themes such as purpose, identity, belonging, resistance did not feel imposed, but instead emerged through our shared engagement with the stories. We came to understand that further meaning making emerges through the power of community. The process revealed that the experience of the Indigenous educators are not isolated, but rather echo one another and reinforce the potential of collective momentum. And then, last but not least, as we moved into the phase of synthesizing knowledge, it felt like an act of nourishing the circle. Visualizing the relationships, patterns, and reoccurring experiences across the stories revealed how each buffalo's contribution strengthened the collective. Their words became sustenance, feeding the concentric circles of relationship that began with our research team and now rippled out to other educators, researchers, and communities.
All right, so this is, oh, our cool little video is working as well. This is us as a group coding, so you can see the magic happening there.
The little shapes are little buffaloes.
Yes, yeah. So grounding our work in relational accountability was of utmost importance. Throughout the research project, we continuously reflected on our values to ensure alignment with an Indigenous paradigm. So what this means is going back to an Indigenous value system, my Naheyao Indigenous value system, I need to constantly go back and recheck and make sure that my purpose in this research project is authentic and we are moving towards a direction of where we want to go. It became apparent that our relationships with one another as researchers and more importantly as friends were at the heart of our project. Our relationships as a group paralleled the connection with our participants, creating a circle within a circle of kinship, care, and accountability. As we mentioned earlier, what we came to call the collective relational inquiry was not just a feature of our process, but it structured every aspect of the research. Our approach became a method in itself. The entire research process, from design and question formulation to the literature review, ethics, analysis, and dissemination, was carried out collectively. In this way, our methodology wasn't just what we used, but it was how we worked together.
To that end, we designed every element of this project as a team. And while there was time that we each worked on different tasks, we never moved forward until each person considered our next steps and contributed to the overall plan. We each listened to all of the interviews, not just our own, participated in the circle process multiple times, conducted the coding together in person. Yes, this required a significant time commitment and more Zoom calls than we want to count, but we understood that the conventional notion of time didn't necessarily apply to this project. Our research collective thrived on the unique strengths of each member, embodying an Indigenous perspective that values collective contributions. This challenges the notion that research must be individual and detached. Instead, we found that collaboration allowed us to align more closely with Indigenous values and conduct ourselves with respect.
So again, going back to Dr. Margaret Kovach, who defines Indigenous resurgent research as research in which Indigenous peoples are the focus for the purposes of advancing self-determination, of achieving the political agenda of liberation, and of making known the experiences and truths of an oppressed group. We understand that resurgence is not just about separating ourselves from the state, but it's also about the daily practices and pedagogical approaches used by Indigenous educators. Their very presence within a colonial education system embodies resurgence. By focusing on the lived experiences of these educators, we have shifted the narrative from a deficit-based perspective to one that highlights strengths. Throughout this project, our group came to understand that relationship is method. Our collective relational inquiry rejected traditional academic norms of individual research, fostering a strong circle of love and friendship at its core, which extended outward towards our participants. This work indicates that resurgent methods are not only embedded in grounded normativities, but also emphasize a transformation in how research is conducted. To clarify, our method is not new and does not require justification to the academic community. As Leanne Simpson states, this is as we have always done. This work does not aim to meet the standards of validity set by positivist approaches. Instead, our resurgent methods allowed us to maintain relational accountability to our participants and their communities, as well as to the knowledge shared. We felt a profound responsibility to engage in only good work that aligned with our values of honesty and integrity. We continually asked ourselves, how can we use this knowledge to improve systems of pedagogy and practice?
So we continue to go back to the stories of our people, and we are continuing to engage in a meaning-making process. But there was one finding that's preliminary that emerged very quickly, and that is what we're calling the paradox of belonging, not belonging. All of the Indigenous teachers spoke about their sense of purpose and belonging, belonging in the classroom, belonging with Indigenous youth, and their purpose as their role as educators. One individual stated, "I know I am right where I am supposed to be." However, every Indigenous educator also expressed a feeling of not belonging. They conveyed that their teachings, beliefs, ways of doing and knowing were often not valued. There was a clear sense of rejection and disregard that was evident in that were evident in their stories of tension with colleagues, the administration, the district, and or the government. It's essential to highlight that every Indigenous educator emphasized how being a source of love, care, and dignity for the Indigenous students they serve is what guides their work. Their purpose is grounding, and yet the paradox of belonging, not belonging still persisted throughout the analysis.
Yeah, so we just wanted to leave you with a quote from one of our educators. There's so many stories in what they've gifted us that we could mention, and it's really hard to narrow it down to one. But one of the questions that we asked the educators was, what advice would you give to your younger self, an emerging Indigenous educator? And this is what she said. I always think back to little me in elementary, and my advice is that you have a place in the world and in education, and you're fun too. You are not a misinformed statistic in an outdated textbook. You belong and you are here, and it gets so much better.
So, obviously we still have some time together and we are want to give you a few minutes to reflect, but we also wanted to say thank you, mahalo, miigwech, pidamayaye. We know that is a pretty tedious and intense project, but we really wanted to highlight that Indigenous research has really been our guide, especially in engaging in these community conversations and walking alongside Indigenous educators. So, thank you truly for listening and being present. And now we have a little meaning making activity reflection for us to engage in a group. Yeah, for these next steps.
If you go ahead, no, it's the next, I
Oh,
think it's the next slide. Keep going. Yeah,
oh,
keep
where's
going.
my thank you slide? Sorry,
Yeah.
guys.
So first, before we get into this little reflection activity, I just want to give an opportunity if anybody wants to or has a question before we start or comment or anything like that. You can either drop it in the chat or raise your hand or just speak out. We're pretty casual in here. All right. I didn't give you very much time, but these are some guiding questions. Oh, we have one. Perfect. Stacy, go ahead.
Aloha. My question was about your methodology, the metaphor of buffalo, and
Mm.
I was wondering about the process of having this metaphor and looking at your own relationship to your culture, your language, your own relationship with buffalo, and what was that process like as you I'm sure there are many ways, many metaphors in your culture, in your language, in your worldview as you came across Buffalo. Can you tell us what that process was like?
Yeah, for sure. That's such a great question. I'm so glad you asked that because we're like super proud of this buffalo metaphor. So for me, being Naheo, the buffalo is definitely part of my culture, part of my history. The land where I came from, the buffalo is a keystone species. And recently, in the last couple years, I would say they are now actually reintroducing wild buffalo back into the treaty territories on the plains. Before, like pre-contact, buffalo were our main food source. We migrated and followed them around as far as because our my tribe was like nomadic. And so, but then once the fur trade happened, obviously buffalo were almost obliterated and almost went extinct. So we were a little bit inspired, first of all, by the buffalo being reintroduced back into the plains. And it actually happened for us. It was actually during a course. So, because this project was part of our master's, we had 2 years of courses before we finished it. And so, it actually happened during one of our courses, and we were asked to think of a metaphor that we could apply to our own research. And I have to say, like in my culture, we're dreamers. So dreams are and visions are like a big part of our sources of knowledge. So for me personally, as a researcher, I wait for it to come to me, or I just know that something's going to appear, or I'm going to see whether waking or sleeping, I'm going to see it, and I'm going to know that it just feels right. So we thought of the buffalo because of, I think I had talked to somebody about, they had made like a documentary about the buffalo being reintroduced. And so I watched the documentary and I'm like thinking about the buffalo. So then we decided to go ahead and use the buffalo. And our course was actually being taught by Margaret Kovach, Dr. Kovach. And she really identified with the buffalo because she's also Plains Cree. And yeah, so then once we started using the buffalo and applying it to our research and really learning and researching the buffalo itself, like there was a lot of things I didn't know about the buffalo. And once we learned, what was one of the things we learned, Alexis, when we talked about how the buffalo gathered around in a winter storm and they would protect all of the little buffalo on the inside? So we were like, oh my gosh, that's just like educators, right? You know what I mean? Educators are they protect the young, and that's part of just how they function. And so every time we found out something new about the buffalo, or every time we looked at something different, we were like, oh my gosh, this really just applies to our research. Like this, it really just fit. And so I think it naturally happens. And then it's funny because once you have a metaphor, then your metaphor actually helps you to make meaning of your data or of your research in different ways if you would never have had a metaphor in the first place. So I really feel like metaphors are super important. Like I'm a firm believer that I think that as far as Indigenous methodologies go, that it's definitely something that you should look into. And if you're Indigenous, I do feel like looking at the land where you are or where you're from, your ancestral territory, your language, your culture, and just thinking about things. But to answer your question in short, I feel like it just comes to you. Do you know what I mean? Sorry. That was a really long explanation, but really excited about it. So thank you.
No, thank you so much. That was very clear to me.
Okay. Okay.
I'll add one little thing, and that is thank you so much for the question. The University of British Columbia is on the Pacific, and so we were studying in Coast Salish territory. And so often people are thinking of the mountains and the waves and the water, but the majority of our group is from the prairies. And so I think that was the other thing is that in all of our communities, primarily, the buffalo is being reintroduced, and it's an intertribal model and it also crosses the medicine line, right? So it's Canadian and American Native communities working together on the reintroduction. And that felt like it's also our group. And then last but not least, the American government in particular intentionally tried to kill off all the buffalo to cut Native communities off of their food source. Okay, you know all this. And so
Mm.
we felt like that was also a sad but real metaphor for how education has been used. And so that was another element that we were thinking about in terms of resurgence. And then last but not least, Dr. Kovach, as Lindsay has said, is from the prairies. And we were really lucky that she was particularly moved that we picked this metaphor because nobody in her career of teaching had picked the buffalo and she was retiring. And so we also felt, oh my gosh, that's just another like connection that feels real.
Yeah, and I think that so often we're so quick to dismiss the spiritual in an academic setting, and I think we really cannot do that. And I think that is something that we just really need to be more aligned with and be okay with it in an academic setting, right? If it feels right, then it's right, for sure. Awesome. Thank you so much. If there's any other questions, if not, we actually thought of some guiding questions from our presentation. I know our presentation was a lot, and and I know some of it applies across borders, but I'm not really too sure how much applies or if there's things that we referenced that you're unsure about. But we would like you to take a couple minutes just to reflect on these questions. So thinking about how educators may also consider themselves researchers, or how can or do Indigenous methodologies inform your research? So maybe thinking about using Indigenous methodologies within your research and your practice. Maybe you have questions that come up from that. And the third question was, how can our diverse experiences and identities enhance the way we teach and learn and or research? So yeah, we can give a few minutes and you can either write down your questions or maybe you're going to doodle or maybe you're going to just think about it. And then you can either drop questions in the chat or we'll come back in a couple minutes. Hey, Alexis, is that what you still wanted to do or?
Yeah, it's up to you all. If you want to turn off your screens for maybe 3 to 5 and do a little jotting down of what came up for
Yeah.
you, and or if you want to just throw it in the mix, it's kind of
Mhm.
whatever you all prefer. I know that our project's a little dense, and so I totally get some meaning making time. And I think the only other thought I'll add is one of our professors is really great about reminding us that research methodologies can be parallel to teaching pedagogies. And so we are always thinking about how our methodologies and our research can inform our teaching and learning practices. So that might give you a little jump start on those questions too. But yeah, why don't we give you 4 minutes to quietly write or doodle or draw, do a little meaning making of your own, and then we'll call you back and chat. All right, y'all. As you feel ready, go ahead and wrap up that thought. If you can come back with videos on as you feel comfortable, that would be amazing. Lindsay and I both believe and are taught that knowledge is created in community. It's not created by an individual. It is gifted to us. It's created amongst one another. And so we're hoping that you all will feel confident sharing some of the things that came up for you. They don't have to be fully developed thoughts. They don't have to be research questions. They can be inklings. They can be inspirations, letting things emerge. And so, yeah, I see that there's already an amazing thought in the chat, and people are welcome to bring their voices forward in this space or in the chat. I think I can stop sharing. Awesome. Okay. That makes it easier, at least on me. Is there anybody that would be willing to just share what came up for you in reflection while we were talking or in making sense of the work that you do? Any parallels? Your introductions already gave away that you're very deep thinkers and astute practitioners. So please, anybody willing to share?
Thanks, Halima. Go ahead and share.
Maria on your end? Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So I was really reflecting on the second question, how do diverse experiences and identities enhance the way we teach and learn? And so I think for me, all I could think about was how everything I create is very personalized in the sense of where I come from and really bringing that into my students. And so one thing that I really enjoy is hukilaos, which is something I grew up with. Is a Hawaiian fishing practice that we do. It's like a huge net, but it's not just about feeding our community. It's just about really working together as a community to accomplish one goal. And I think that's how where we come from and what we grew up with, and really bringing it into our classrooms has really enhanced the way my students learn. Because they're like, oh, I grew up with that as well. Or some are like, oh, I never heard about this way of fishing. And so bringing back into seeing that there's more than just a practice, but it's a lifestyle as well. And so I think that's one thing I really enjoyed. And mahalo for your guys' mana'o and mo'olalos. I really appreciate you all. And thank you for giving me this space to share what I do. Mahalo.
Yeah, thank you. I love how a practice is deepened because everyone's working together and how that can create deeper meaning in a classroom.
And I really love just moving away from what we think is a Western standard of education in the sense that there's so many different cultures and there's so many different perspectives. And that's really how we should be teaching and learning, right? And so moving away from there's this one standard that, because of course we have curriculum and that's all laid out, but I think it's super special for students to be able to experience that in your classroom. Thank you. All right, so I think there's a question in the chat here. Emily says, what are practices of holding space for difficult emotions and positionalities, especially in the context of being in the imperial core and struggling with westernized and colonized narratives and complexities? How to practice accountability in the context of digital information and knowledge. Oh my gosh, that is the question of the hour, isn't it? Holy.
I can take the first part and you take the
Yeah.
second.
Yeah, for sure. I'm processing. It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I wrote down Imperial Core because, yeah, that is fire right there. Thank you for that. And yeah, I have held a lot of restorative circles in my time, even with school administrators and students. And I also have walked alongside students in a predominantly white institution where there were really hard experiences and they needed space. And so I find that if you don't make space for difficult emotions, they're coming out one way or the other, right? It's going to either erode trust, erode relationships, or that accountability piece is going to mean some truth telling. And I don't think it can be forced, especially in school settings. Oh, cool. Thank you, Emily. Yes, I love that. Good on you and your friend. But yeah, I think I feel like difficult emotions are necessary. There's a author that we had to read really early on. His name's Kasha Hennekew. He also teaches at UBC, and the article is called Sacred Pain. And part of what he breaks down is that in Western culture, pain is often interpreted as a sign that something has gone wrong, but that sometimes in Indigenous culture, it's a messenger about where you're supposed to go next. And so I've tried to hold that close, and it doesn't mean that accountability isn't, you're not letting people off the hook or letting an administration or a systemic occurrence off the hook. I think of it more as how are we being present to this pain and then trying to rebuild this relationship and what messages are coming to us as a community, as people in relationship about this pain. That's the first part. I think just I'm thinking about kids in school. Thank you, Jamie. Oh, yeah. I'm thinking about kids in school in particular and how I just don't think school communities can be safe unless there is some element of accountability. But I also think doing that work needs to be long and slow.
So it's funny because I think I took something totally different from the question, which is hilarious.
Great.
And I think just because of something that I've learned recently too. So in Canada, because Canada was colonized, we I guess, call our current state settler colonialism. So we're living in a state of settler colonialism where there's still the impacts of colonization are still built into our systems and structures, and it's embedded and into these processes. And so when I think of the context of being in the imperial core and struggling and looking at Indigenous struggle, of course, is there. We understand that intergenerational trauma, those types of things. But then when I think about settlers, so in this case, like white folks, right, living in Canada on Indigenous territory, and we're in a state of reconciliation or a process of reconciliation and decolonization at the moment. And so I think about settlers and allyship. And I recently just read an article from a prof who wrote it at my university, but she talks about a feeling of being uncomfortable as a settler, a feeling of being uncomfortable, a feeling of not being, I guess you could say, what was the word I was looking for? Being in a kind of a state of flux, like constant flux, like nothing's really, there's not really an end in sight. And this author was talking about calling herself an ally and what that means. And who determines who can be an ally? First of all, who determines how long you're an ally? Does that, once you consider yourself an ally, are you always an ally? And so there's these feelings of uncomfortability and pain that can sometimes, I think, accompany that. And thinking about, especially in this work that we're doing, being a settler, and I think that it's okay to be uncomfortable and that it's okay to not really know where you're supposed to be going or what you're supposed to be doing as an ally. The one takeaway from that article that she had talked about was I don't determine if I am an ally. The Indigenous folk that I work alongside, they are the ones who determine if I am an ally. So transferring power back to Indigenous folk, right? And then always questioning yourself too as to, am I still an ally? Are my actions still in allyship? What? And so that it's just a constant state of movement. And it's almost like there's not really an end point. We're okay, I'm an ally and I'm doing this and I'm doing this great work. And so there's that feeling of discomfort. And I think that's okay. And I think that that's where the learning happens, and that's where those transformative moments happen for folks, because everybody's on a different journey. It means different things to different folks, but I think we always really have to think about ownership and ownership of the name of being an ally in the context that we're living in, right? And so, yeah, that's where I came away from, which is so funny, Alexis. We are totally on two different brainwaves, but that's okay. Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you. Oh, and then your other question about digital information and knowledge. We're all in the age of AI and thinking about Indigenous data sovereignty. And so, as an Indigenous scholar, I have been trained not to use AI with sensitive information, or just making sure that we understand who data belongs to, where it's going to be stored, that type of thing. I can't say I'm like super educated in the tech part of things, but from my understanding, it's still a work in progress as far as figuring out who that data belongs to, and we have to really think about where it's going. I'm not sure if that really was your question, but that's where I was going.
We're answering it from every angle.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that article that talked about a digital bundle that we had to read. And it basically talked about just the way that you care for a sacred bundle or a medicine pouch is how we need to care for Indigenous data online. And I like that extent and degree of both protection as well as regard and sacredness.
Oh, I
Not
see.
that we've answered the question.
Yeah. Okay, Malia had a question talking about Sarah Ahmed. Okay, so I just started reading Sarah Ahmed. I'm so excited that you brought this up. Feminist killjoy, when happiness is the performance that maintains the status quo, and being a killjoy is a stance you intentionally take to reckon with those structural systems of power. Yes. So that affect, right? And this reminds me of, so in Canada, I'm not sure about how much in the States, but Indigenous folks or First Nations folks are often referred to as resilient, right? So we're resilient. We have resilience because we've survived so much, which is true. It's very true. But when you're thinking about the word resilient and the term resilient, and it's used so often and so frequently, then it almost gives Indigenous folks or First Nations folks this requirement that they have to be resilient. And so, what happens if you're not resilient, right? So, thinking about how that ownership of that name or how language can really give an affective response like that, and almost creating some sort of, I guess you want to say, narrative surrounding a specific group of people. Right. So, yes, thank you for bringing up Sarah Ahmed. She's on my reading list this summer, so I'm very excited. Thank you.
And I think that might be all we have time for. I'm going to pull up our screen again. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Apologies. Oh, are our emails on here, Lindsay?
Yeah. So, if you go back to the buffalo picture,
Oh, thank you.
yeah.
Perfect. So, Jamie, am I right that we're at our hard stop time? Okay, I got the
We end
sisters.
at 12:20, but if you all want to stay and chat with them, we have the next session it's a flexible session and it's meant for networking. So if someone wants to stay behind and chat, if you have the time, feel free. We can also do so in GatherTown.
But seriously, a big thank you all for having us. We're really grateful. Yeah.
Do you want to go to the references? If you want, you can take a photo of the references pages if that works, because we probably won't share the slides.
Oh, sorry. I'm going. Here we go.
So there's a couple pages. So maybe go back, I think. Yeah, this is the first page. We'll just pause a couple minutes on each page, and then you can take a photo with your phone of the references for sure. Sorry, I totally interrupted you, Alexis.
Oh, no, I love it because I couldn't see with so many screens. So that's what collaboration looks like live. So that's the first screen of references. Here's number 2. Gosh, there's so many too. I feel like we've added.
There's, you know what, my reading list is so updated from this one, but this is a good foundational reading list for Indigenous scholars across Canada and the US. So I think
Yeah.
so.
And the resurgent methods, is that Kovacs as well?
No, Resurgence. You can read about Leanne Simpson, Glenn Cotard. I'm just trying to think. What's his name? Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting now. But yeah,
No worries.
Leanne Simpson is definitely somebody who is the lead thinker, I guess you could say.
And then that's our last page of references.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I can't see if there's anything else. If people got those photos, I can go back to our email addresses. And then, yeah, it sounds like there's a flexible session next, but if anybody wants to stay and chat, you're more than welcome to. And again, we're really grateful that you had us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. This was great.
To exit, folks, you can exit the Zoom and then go back through GatherTown to the main gathering session for our networking time and some wows and wonderings facilitated by Tara.
I just wanted to quickly mahalo you folks for your time and for all the wonderful, awesome things that you shared with us today. And my greatest takeaway that I wanted to mahalo you folks for again is you mentioning how metaphors help make meaning and connection to the work and the purpose of all of this. And I think that's so important in the work that we do and makes the connection and reconnection back to Aina, to our land, our place and our communities so organic in that approach. So thank you. And then also mentioning, reminding us not to dismiss the spiritual in education and in the work that we do. Thank you so much for that inspiration.